All right, hello everybody. This is Aaron Schragi, and this is my case study on community security and village patrol safety officers. So we'll go ahead and start by defining those two things. What is community security? Community security refers to the approach to implement human security, human development, and state building concepts at local level. It aims to protect people from the loss of traditional relationships and values, and from sectarian and ethnic violence. And in my own terms, I would say that community security is just making sure that everybody who's a part of a society is safe from all types of harassment and violence. So that's why we need, this is why in the community I'm from, Anchorage, Alaska, we have police that enforce laws and keep people safe. And with my case study, we're going to be looking at different villages in Alaska, and we're going to talk about some of the issues that there are with the police forces. And we're going to talk about what a village patrol safety officer is and why they're necessary. But let's just define what a VPSO is. So a village patrol safety officer is a first responder that bridges the gap between the time an incident is reported and the time the Alaska State Troopers can respond. And they provide limited emergency medical services, search and rescue operations, fire prevention and suppression, emergency response and preparedness, public safety education, and community policing. So a VPSO is somebody who is a first responder who can do all sorts of things: EMS, fire, police, education. They do all these things, and they live out in the villages and provide this service. So why is this necessary? Well, if we look at Alaska, Alaska is very large. It's the largest state in the United States, and it's very spread out. There's 229 federally recognized tribes, and there's lots of villages that need protection. So when we think about that, we need VPSOs. So what's the problem? All right, so I talked about this in a different presentation, so I'll make this brief. But a lot of the villages have a really big issue with police forces because a lot of these communities, they're not like normal cities. They are very small, and we're talking anywhere from 10 to 50 to 100 people, sometimes a couple hundred people, but they all vary in sizes. And when you have these really small communities of, let's say, 60 people, it can be hard to get a task force out there, to have a police force, and it can be hard to get resources out there because they're so remote from the rest of the world. A lot of these places don't have roads that get you in there, and the only way to get there is to hike in, ATVs, or to fly. So that's a whole nother issue on its own. But then these villages, they're not run. They run at a tribal government level, and for this reason, they're actually able to hire people who have criminal backgrounds. So Nimmer Mike on the left is a registered sex offender, served 6 years behind bars in state prison, and then got hired as a village police officer in Stebbins. Now Stebbins had 7 police officers. All 7 of them were convicted criminals. So we're looking at a community where every single cop is a criminal, really. And we wonder how that happens. Well, it's something that's being worked on by Governor Dunleavy, but we have a long ways to go still. Senator Lisa Murkowski on the right with the U.S. Attorney General William P. Barr tour a jail. So if we look at this jail, it's just got some wooden doors that keep people inside. And, it's pretty small, tight spaces, and not really safe for the police force. So let's talk about these village public safety officers and why they're necessary. So we see a big issue with the village policing. So these village public safety officers are kind of a way to provide an emergency responder that lives in the communities. So that there's immediate, if there's an emergency, you can have someone right away. Whereas the other option, if you don't have the local police, what you have is Alaska State Troopers. Alaska State Troopers have jurisdiction over the entire state, but it can be days or even weeks to get to some of these villages if there's an emergency, depending on the weather. So the VPSO program was a response to the problems with the training, turnover, and performance of the village police officer program in the 1970s, which we just talked about. So what's the challenges with the VPSO? It sounds like a really good thing. You have first responders that live in the villages. They can do policing, they can do fire, they can do EMS. It sounds like an amazing thing, but it also has its flaws. One, they have a very big lack of funding. There's not enough money to have these members in every single community. Like I said, there's 229 federal recognized tribes. Not every single one gets to have a VPSO. And if I recall from the PowerPoint, it was about 1 to 2 VPSOs in the at the villages that get them. If we look at the infrastructure and housing of these communities, there's a very large lacking infrastructure for these VPSOs to live at. A lot of these communities don't have houses for them to live at. And there's a high turnover rate, high training costs, as well as low salary and benefits. Now, those have been improved over the years. Initially, when the program started, the starting pay was around $11 an hour, and it bumped into the lower 20s an hour after about 10 years. The other downside to the VPSOs is they can't transition into police officers easily. It's not like a stepping stone where if you do a VPSO for 5 years, then you could easily become a police officer somewhere else in the state or even somewhere else in the country. So if we look at this community here, we talk about infrastructure, and this is a place where you're asking somebody to basically give up their life and come live out at a village to protect them. That's really hard to convince someone to do. But on top of that, you look at this community here, you can see the roads are being washed away. The permafrost is melting. This is called climate change, and it is changing these communities, and it's destroying a lot of the little that is already there. So that's a big problem. So what other securities can we relate this to? So I just talked about climate change and how that affects that. But what about personal security and food security? Personal security. The reason I put this in is because if you don't have personal security, how are you going to have community security? So this is really important. If everyone's going to have personal security, these VPSOs are a big deal. I think it's important that we have them in the communities. And we look at food security. We're asking people to live out in these villages, and they have to work for the food they're going to eat. And the pricing of foods is very expensive, as we learned in the previous presentation on food security. So a lot of money that they earn is actually going back into the food that they have to buy, as well as what happens if there's a state emergency and food can't be shipped out. Well, the people that are doing these jobs can't just go hunting like everyone else because they have to work. So that can be another problem. So let's look at some solutions. So the infrastructure definitely needs to be improved. There needs to be proper housing for the people that are going to be doing this job. And there should be a better road system, which would improve food resources being shipped out, as well as people able to get in and out of these communities. Increased funding. There has been a significant decrease in funding for the VPSO program. Even just recently, Governor Dunleavy has made cuts to the recruitment budget for the VPSOs and has eliminated funding for positions that haven't been filled. So we need to increase the funding. And the other solution is increased marketing and recruitment. I think this is huge because I actually already knew about VPSOs, but only because of my work, because I work in the emergency services. But I was listening to the interview with Jody Potts, and she was a VPSO, but she only found out about it because she had actually ran into a state trooper who recognized her and actually sat her down and talked about it. And she loved it, but she didn't know about it. So there needs to be better marketing and recruitment to get the knowledge of this job out there so that people can sign up for it. Okay, so that's been my presentation on community security on the Village Patrol Safety Officers. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comments on discussion board, which is also where I'm going to leave the works cited. So thank you, everybody.